Nah, we don't need a professional to fell these trees, okay? Temp account as the events written about happened in a rather small town and some people might know my actual nick. Also, English is not my native language, so please excuse any mistakes. This is the story of how my dad, with my consent, but against my advice, accidentally weaponized a tree. I live in the capital of a Central European country and recently visited my parents at the countryside. They needed me to help to deal with some trees they wanted to fell. I assumed they wanted to finally make short work of the semi-healthy trees along the driveway that kept branching into the way. But no. They decided that the row of beeches at the southeastern corner of the property had to go. You should know 3 things here. 1. Those trees are really tall, like 15 meters, about 50 feet, and rather thin too. There is an equally high barn just a few meters behind those trees on the neighbor's property to the south. It is pretty old, but has been renovated time and time again to serve as a storage and party location. 3. In front of the trees are compost containers, a crooked walnut tree and bushes that my mother planted, creating a corridor of only around 7 meters, 23 feet, for the trees to land in without breaking anything. Also important, my sister, also living in a bigger city, and not present when these events took place, and I are actually the co-owners of the house and property as my father transferred ownership to us some years ago. While so far those beeches had survived their fair share of storms, they'd probably become a problem as they kept growing. And since new neighbors on the property bordering on the eastern side are in the process of building a house, they'd be their problem as well. So I agreed that they had to go. However, my parents wanted to fell them by themselves, meaning my dad would be the one to operate the chainsaw on them. He worked as a technician before retiring, always did a lot of repair and building work in and around the house. But he is past 70, has adopted a rather unhealthy lifestyle after leaving the workforce, and his eyesight and motoric skills, while still perfectly suited for most kinds of technical operations, have deteriorated a bit. Knowing this, I objected and suggested hiring a professional to do the job and sharing the costs. I argued that any damage, beechwood is pretty heavy, or injury that might occur if things went sideways wouldn't be covered by insurance and thus come in quite costly. Also, doing this without even as much as notifying the local authorities might be illegal. Okay, it's the countryside. If any regulations of such kind even exist, folks here like to interpret them as friendly advice rather than an actual law, but I digress. My parents wouldn't have any of it and even refused to get an estimate from a professional. I did some basic research and found out that the costs would probably come in at around 500 to 1,000 euros, $600 to $1,200. Not a small sum, but the forester or lumberjack who'd take up the work would be responsible for any damage. No dice, even after trying to bring my points across several times. Nah, we don't need a professional. Why should we waste money when we can do it by ourselves, they said. It will be fine, they said, literally. And while I usually am able to put them off bad ideas by convincing one of them, this time both were hellbent on going for it. And once that is the case, all hope is basically lost, as especially my mother can be the most stubborn as heck. At least I know whom I inherited this trait from. As property co-owner, I technically could have just forbidden my parents to fell those trees on their own. But they are my parents. I love them. They're adults. They live there and keep stuff in order. So I refrained from taking this route. So I told them that they should go ahead if they really want to, but I would not help them with this. My mom asked if I would help them cutting it up and carrying the wood once the trees were laying on the ground. Important aspect. I agreed. Also, I begged them to wait for my sister to call them the next day at lunchtime, since I messaged her about the situation and she wanted to back me up. But no. Next morning I was woken up by my mother calling me to help cutting up the first tree which my father had brought down successfully. So I dutifully crawled out of bed and did my part in this little deforestation project. Tree 2 and 3 out of 5 also were felled without any incidents. Then came tree 4. My father apparently had not seen a higher up branch that stretched between the branches of tree 5. So once the chainsaw had fully severed the stem, instead of falling sideways as intended, it got caught up swirled around its axis, and crashed into the walnut tree, which started to bend significantly due to the load. Now they wanted me to help moving the beech by pushing it to roll along the edge of one of the walnut tree's main branches. Besides me knowing that this wasn't doable, as I said, a 15 meters high tree is a heavy affair, I refused. "But you said you'd help us once a tree is felled," they pleaded. I pointed out that I'd only assist once it was laying on the ground, and leaning into the walnut tree doesn't quite fit that definition. More pleading, but now it was my time to be stubborn, and rightfully so. Since there was no way to, or machinery, to pull the beech away, my father decided to cut parts off its lower stem until handling it would be possible. Multiple laws of physics however intervened after he had cut the second large chunk, shifting the center of mass of the beech so that it suddenly started to tilt when its branches prevented it from sliding downwards as intended. Then the walnut tree reacted to the lighter load and shift of balance by springing back, knocking the beech into the neighbor's barn like a battering ram. The dry wooden wall planks didn't stand a chance and splintered away as the fell tree forced its way into the building, creating an impressive hole. My parents now stood there, dumbfounded. My dad slowly scratched his head and tried to realize the situation, while my mother slowly started to panic. "Oh no, 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 what do we do now? What if the neighbor calls the police on us?" I had watched the spectacle from the balcony and couldn't decide whether to be shocked or to descend into uncontrollable laughter. Closer investigation from outside showed that the tree had crushed a chair, a table, and also caused a cupboard with party equipment to collapse. Though my dad had at least reached his goal and freed the beech from the grasp of the walnut tree, but there was no way of getting it unstuck from the barn without entering. A few hours later, the neighbor, who knew about my parents' plans, returned home, which is where this story might have taken a very bitter and costly turn. But he proved to be a very gracious guy and took the incident, which in the worst case could have made the whole barn collapse, in stride. He first was negatively amazed by what had transpired, but after inspection of the barn he didn't deem it to be necessary to involve the insurance or officials, and said he would repair the damage by himself if my parents agreed to pay for the materials, replacement of the destroyed furniture, thanks, neighbor, and some beer, probably a lot of beer, for his time, which they gladly accepted. His bill isn't yet in as he has just begun patching up the hole, but it will easily be upwards of €2,000, roughly $2,400, plus the beer of course, still making a professional tree removal look like a really good deal. My father offered him to assist with the repairs. The neighbor thought about it for the fraction of a second, and then politely declined. I wonder why. 3. P.S. Tree 5 is still standing. TLDR. Parents want to cut down some trees at the edge of the property all by themselves. I object and suggest hiring a professional due to safety and insurance concerns. Parents claim that's too expensive and proceed anyway. The operation goes hilariously wrong to the detriment of a neighbor's barn. Things turn out much costlier than the professional would been. Edit. Added TLDR. Now let's read some comments to see what the Reddit community thought of this malicious compliance. I'm always floored when people post stuff about how we should excuse their not flawless English and then proceed to post in what is really much better English than native speakers generally use. Also, this story is hilarious. Yeah, cutting down a tree isn't rocket science if you have half a brain, but legit insurance is worth much brain. I'm finally getting to the age where I'll listen to these arguments. Yup. When you hire someone to do a job for you, they become financially liable for the results of their work. As a result, the vast majority of business owners carry insurance to cover various fuck-ups. I have to constantly explain this to my fiancée, who always wants to help the professionals. While the gesture is nice, as soon as she starts to touch things, financial liability shifts back to us. It was at this moment that your folks realized that pride can't properly cut down trees. It's hell on barns, though. Such realization would be wonderful, but denial is strong with some people. There's always a justification, however flimsy, to make it not their fault. That's the way the cookie crumbles. Don't you just love it when you try to save a dime and it costs you $1? As property co-owner, I technically could have just forbidden my parents to fell those trees on their own. That is that place where you send them on a vacation for a few days to think about it and hire a professional to get it done before they come back. They are co-owners though too, so have equal authority to veto a professional. My sister, also living in a bigger city and not present when these events took place, and I are actually the co-owners of the house and property. I read that as the sister and OP were the owners, not the parents. OP actually replied to this comment to provide more information and clarification. Yes, that is indeed the case. My parents do have the contractual secured right to live there till the end of their days and can make most decisions that don't impact ownership as they see fit, which is fine. Since they are the ones who built large parts of the place, it is their home. They shoulder the base costs, electricity, municipal taxes, waste service and such. Up until this tree project I hadn't even spent a thought on vetoing any of their doings. I do hope they've learned a lesson and will listen to reason in case anything like that should arise again. And now let's move on to the next story. Only cut down part of the tree. So, thought I would tell you of a story of malicious compliance on the part of my father. Years ago we lived in a house, on a large plot house built up on the front third, leaving a massive rear garden, and in there at the bottom, was a very large avocado pear tree. Large tree, a good number of years old, and bore some pretty large pears every year. However, it had a split trunk, and also was tall, around 15 meters high, taller than the telephone cabling that ran along the bottom of the property, and which also ran through this tree to the house. Dad liked the avocado pears, though, because of the height of the tree, they only grew at the top. So he made a 6 meters long pole with a net, the swimming pool net pole with a broken net attached, in order to attempt to get at least a few undamaged. But this only got the lower third of the tree, and the top fruit would fall down in the wind, shattering on the ground. They also fell on the neighbor's property, and his roof had received a few holes from these missiles landing on it. But the neighbor and my father were firm friends, so would fix the holes together, but were getting fed up of this tree. So one day they both confronted my mother and insisted they trim the tree, and she eventually agreed. She insisted that they only cut down half the tree, and they both agreed to this. So, Saturday comes, Dad has rented a chainsaw. They have a nice sharp blade, a lot of strong rope, and the telco tech there to repair the phone line. Again, when the tree snaps it. The neighbor and my dad talk about this job, and, as mother is out shopping, they come to the conclusion, along with the telco tech, that the best solution is to obey and cut half the tree down. Unanimously they come to the conclusion the best half is the bottom half, and I'm sent up the tree, lightest person, and we had the telco ladder to get me up 6 meters to where the trunk was still thick enough to be useful, as avocado wood is not the strongest wood, and even very thick branches will break easily. So, rope attached, chainsaw at the ready, and we all pull on the rope at a long distance, while the trunk has the notch cut, and the rear cut through till the timber moment fell roughly where we wanted it, just flattened a few banana stems that were in the way, but those would regrow anyway pretty fast. Telco tech said sladder again, and I attach rope again, and again tree fall in the right direction, this time tasking the phone line with it. Telco tech splices in a new section, and goes up the pole to connect to the pole again, and leaves. Then we got the task of moving the chunks as they were cut, making a few piles of leaves and twigs for burial in the ground, and a few piles of wood that was left to dry as firewood. Dads and the neighbor cracked open some beers to celebrate this occasion as they finished up. Then mom came home and walked through to the back. She came down shouting what had they done. She had agreed to only half the tree, and they had cut it off at knee height. As one, the neighbor and dad replied, with big grins, that they had indeed only taken down half the tree, and had decided the bottom half was the best part to remove, as it was easiest. Not their fault the top did not stay up there. Banana shrubs grew back fast, and we simply got avocado pears from the neighbor, as he had a few small trees that you could pick from easily, and we gave bananas from the harvest we had. His roof stayed intact, no more half-kilo missiles punching through the asbestos sheeting. And now let's move on to the comments. I'm glad your neighbor was cool enough to not get too upset about the entire situation. It could have gone in an entirely different direction if he was, possibly involving r/tree law. Sounds like this isn't a place that r/tree law would apply. I'm guessing this country doesn't have tree law yet. bananas, avocados, and asbestos roofing? Just wondering, where does this story take place? I'm guessing it's closer to the equator than Texas. Asbestos cement plates were widely used as roofing material up until late 70s/early 80s all over Europe and most likely also the US. It's one of the safest asbestos building materials as the fibers are firmly embedded in the cement, and even if it breaks it's relatively unlikely to free individual asbestos fibers. It's still treated as dangerous, though, and needs trained people in hazmat gears to remove and depositing at hazardous waste dumps. The shingles have a lifetime of 30 to 40 years, that is, people with that kind of roof either replaced it in recent years, or are currently monitoring its state to decide when they'll replace it. Honestly, I feel bad for the tree. You can tell which of these commenters are not homie are winners. Nothing like having repair your house after a 60-hour work week. Yeah, I like trees, but that one sounded like a major safety hazard. No kidding. Major dick move my ass. If she wanted to keep the tree so damn badly, she should been the one patching the roof every time the avocados punched through it. Oh wait, that still wouldn't work, because it'd be coming out of their money. That's clearly a time to get rid of the old one and plant a new, small one if you want one so badly. A surprise character shows up in the story. The mother. I thought this was gonna either be an issue between the neighbor and dad, or an issue between dad and the city. I was so confused by this story. Nowhere does it talk about the tree being important to the mother. Just the father liking the fruit of the tree and he and the neighbor fixing holes together. It reads like no one is bothered by this tree, and then they decide to cut it down and use funny phrasing to make it a story. It's not malicious compliance if there is no conflict to begin with. Though, personally, I hate anyone who would choose to ruin decades of growth like this. Just trim the damn thing and let nature be. Currently I'm in a battle over a too tall tree which is in no danger of hurting anything except the open woods behind my house. So I'm touchy. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us. What were your thoughts on today's stories? Be sure to leave them in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps this channel grow.